The iron gates of the Illinois Correctional Facility creaked open, releasing Lorraine Parker to freedom after 8 years of imprisonment. The morning Chicago air hit her face with a mixture of exhaust fumes and the smell of a nearby bakery. The 42-year-old woman clutched a worn duffel bag containing the few possessions she had left from her former life. Lorraine stopped at a bus stop, looking around at the city that had changed beyond recognition over the years. New skyscrapers stretched toward the sky, and old neighborhoods had been gentrified. Even the bus route numbers were different. She took a crumpled piece of paper out of her pocket with the address of the Social Rehabilitation Center where she was supposed to report within 24 hours of her release. The bus took her to the city center. At the Social Services building, Lorraine was greeted with little enthusiasm. An employee named Carol, a tired woman in her 50s, mechanically filled out the paperwork, barely looking up. "Do you have a place to live?" Carol asked, without looking up from her computer. "Not yet," Lorraine replied, trying to hide her irritation at the indifferent tone. "We can provide a bed in a hostel for 30 days. That should be enough time to find a job and rent a place. Do you have a profession?" Lorraine smirked. "What profession? Drug dealing? That's what she got 8 years for." "I worked as a sales consultant," she lied. Carol nodded and handed her several brochures. "A list of job openings for people with criminal records. Don't get your hopes up. The selection isn't great. Mostly cleaning, moving, dishwashing. Good luck." The dormitory turned out to be a dilapidated building in the South Side neighborhood. A room for 4, a bunk bed by the window overlooking the parking lot. Her roommates were also former prisoners, each with their own story of downfall. Lorraine quickly realized that she couldn't stay here for long. The following days turned into a series of humiliating interviews. Employers smiled politely until they got to the question about criminal records on the application form. After that, their faces would turn to stone, and the conversation would quickly come to an end. "Unfortunately, we cannot hire people with a criminal record," they said at the grocery store. "We have a strict corporate policy," they replied at the dry cleaners. "Try somewhere else," they advised at the cafe. After a week of searching, Lorraine finally got lucky. The cleaning company City Clean agreed to hire her as a cleaner in office buildings. The salary was meager, barely enough to rent a tiny room in the basement of an old house in a working-class neighborhood. In the evenings, sitting on the only chair in her cubbyhole, Lorraine often thought about the past. Memories of Arthur were especially painful. They had met 15 years ago in a bar on the north side. He was working as a laborer at the time, and she was a cashier at a supermarket. Both dreamed of a better life and made plans for the future. Arthur was a kind, hard-working man. He truly loved her and spoiled her as much as he could. They rented a small apartment and saved up for their wedding. They got married a year after they met. The first 3 years were happy. Arthur got a promotion, became a foreman, then a junior manager. They had more money and moved to a better neighborhood. But gradually, life began to weigh on them. Loans, bills, a constant lack of funds for the things they wanted. Lorraine saw how other families lived, with cars, vacations, nice clothes. Arthur's salary grew slowly, but their appetites grew faster. At first, it was just a side job. A friend offered her a job delivering goods, small packages that had to be handed over to certain people in shopping malls. Lorraine knew they were drugs, but the money was easy and fast. In one evening, she earned as much as Arthur did in a week. Arthur knew nothing. Lorraine told him that she had gotten a job at an event planning agency and was working evenings and weekends. He was happy for her success and proud that his wife was so enterprising. Gradually, Lorraine got deeper and deeper into it. From a simple courier, she became a distributor. She had her own clients, a steady income, and respect in certain circles. She bought expensive things, took Arthur to nice restaurants, but always found explanations for her sudden wealth. The end came unexpectedly. A police operation uncovered the entire network. Lorraine was arrested right at home while she was counting the day's takings. Arthur stood in the bedroom doorway, not understanding what was happening. In his eyes, she saw not anger, but deep disappointment and pain. The trial was quick. 8 years for drug trafficking. Arthur visited her in the detention center only once. He sat opposite her, looked through the bars, and remained silent. Then he said quietly, "I didn't know you were like that. I didn't know you could lie like that." 6 months later, the divorce papers arrived. Arthur didn't demand anything. He just wanted to be free from his marriage to a criminal. Lorraine signed all the papers without even reading them. Now, 8 years later, sitting in her shabby little room, she thought about how Arthur was the only person who truly loved her, and she lost him because of her own stupidity and greed. Arthur Parker woke up every morning at 6:30 to the sound of his alarm clock, but today he woke up on his own, a few minutes early. Jenna was snoring peacefully next to him, her blonde hair scattered across the pillow. Even in her sleep, she looked calm and kind. Arthur got up carefully, trying not to wake his wife, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. Their house in Lincoln Park was modest but cozy. It had 2 floors and a small garden where Jenna grew tomatoes and greens. Arthur had bought this house 3 years ago when it became clear that their relationship was serious. It was then that, for the first time in many years, he felt he could plan for the future. Jenna appeared in the kitchen in her bathrobe, stretched, and hugged him from behind. "Good morning, my love," she whispered, burying her face in his shoulder. "Good morning. Coffee's ready," Arthur replied, turning to face her. Even after 2 years of marriage, he still couldn't believe that this wonderful woman was his wife. Jenna was the complete opposite of Lorraine. Calm, honest, reliable. She worked as a social worker for the city's Department of Family and Children's Services. Every day, she helped people in difficult life situations, finding foster families for orphaned children, counseling families on the verge of divorce, working with victims of domestic violence. "I have a tough day ahead of me," Jenna said as she poured coffee. "I need to find a family for 2 brothers. The younger one is only 4, the older one is 9. Their parents died in a car accident a month ago. They have no relatives." Arthur knew how hard each case like this was for Jenna. She was never indifferent to other people's pain and always tried to do more than her job required. "You'll find one," he said, kissing her on the forehead. "You always find a way." "Is Tommy up yet?" Jenna asked, glancing at the clock. "Yes, I can hear him fussing in the bathroom." Tommy Collins was Jenna's son from her first marriage, a 16-year-old teenager who was initially wary of his stepfather's arrival in the house. Jenna's first husband left the family when Tommy was 10, and since then, the boy had seen his father only a few times. Arthur understood that winning the teenager's trust would not be easy. He never tried to replace Tommy's father, but he tried to be a friend and mentor. Gradually, the ice melted. Arthur helped the boy with algebra, taught him to drive, and went with him to baseball games. "Mom, can I go to Jason's after school today? We want to play a new game on the console," Tommy asked, appearing in the kitchen with his backpack on his shoulders. "Sure, but no later than 8. And don't forget to do your homework," Jenna replied, handing him a breakfast sandwich. "Thanks, Mom. Arthur, see you tonight." Tommy waved to his stepfather and ran out the door. Arthur smiled. 2 years ago, the boy addressed him exclusively by his first and last name. Now he just used his first name, but with warmth in his voice. It was progress. Jenna smiled too, watching her husband's reaction. "He loves you, you know. He's just shy about showing it." "I know. He's a good kid." "You're good too. Every day I thank my lucky stars that we met." They had met 4 years ago in completely mundane circumstances. Arthur was overseeing the renovation of the Social Services Department building where Jenna worked. They greeted each other in the hallways for several weeks. Then he plucked up the courage to ask her out to lunch. Their first date was at a small Italian restaurant. Jenna talked about her work with such enthusiasm that Arthur realized he was with someone who sincerely wanted to make the world a better place. He told her about his journey from a simple worker to a manager in a construction company, about how important it was for him to create something solid and durable. Arthur only told Jenna about his first marriage after several months of dating. Jenna listened to the story about Lorraine without judgment, just squeezed his hand and said, "We all make mistakes. The main thing is to learn from them." The wedding was modest. Only Jenna's parents, a few close friends, and Tommy as a witness. Arthur didn't want a lavish celebration. What was more important to him was the feeling of security and stability that this woman gave him. Now, as he saw his wife off to work, Arthur felt a deep satisfaction with his life. He had a loving family, a good job, a home. Everything he had dreamed of in his youth, but which had been destroyed by Lorraine's betrayal. At work, the day passed with the usual concerns. Arthur was coordinating the renovation of an old warehouse into an office center. The project was complex. It required preserving the building's historical architecture while incorporating modern technology. These were the kinds of challenges he enjoyed most. During his lunch break, he called Jenna as usual. "How are things with the brothers?" he asked. "I think I found a family, a young couple from the suburbs who can't have children of their own. They met the boys this morning, and the older one immediately took the younger one by the hand and said to his new parents, 'We're only together.' My heart almost burst. That's great. So we'll have a festive dinner tonight?" "Definitely. Tommy promised to be back by 8, so we'll have time to eat as a family." After talking to his wife, Arthur felt a surge of energy. Moments like these reminded him why he cherished his new life so much. Jenna was making the world a better place with her work, and he supported her by creating comfort and stability at home. But sometimes, in rare moments when he was alone, Arthur was visited by disturbing thoughts. Lorraine was supposed to be released this year. He remembered the sentence clearly: 8 years for drug trafficking. When he signed the divorce papers, the lawyer had told him the date. Arthur never told Jenna the details of what had happened with his first wife. He only said that they had divorced because they were different people and it hadn't worked out. Jenna didn't press him for details. She respected his right to privacy about his past. But now, with Lorraine's prison term coming to an end, Arthur found himself thinking more and more about what would happen if she tried to contact him. He had changed his phone number immediately after the divorce, moved to another neighborhood, and changed jobs. But Chicago wasn't that big a city, and if she wanted to find him, she would. What scared him most wasn't the threat of physical violence. Lorraine had never been aggressive. What scared him was the possibility that the past would burst into his present and destroy the happiness he had so carefully built. Jenna was a kind person, but she had grown up in a well-to-do family and had never encountered the criminal world. How would she react to the fact that her husband had been married to a drug dealer? How would it affect Tommy, who had just begun to trust him? In the evening, the whole family gathered for dinner. Jenna made Tommy's favorite dish, spaghetti with meatballs. The boy talked about a new game he had played at a friend's house and shared his plans for the weekend. "Can the 3 of us go to Lake Michigan on Saturday?" Tommy suggested. "It's great there right now, not too cold yet." "Great idea," Jenna agreed. "Arthur, what do you think?" "I'd love to," Arthur replied, looking at the happy faces of his wife and stepson. At moments like this, he knew he was ready to do anything to protect this family, even if it meant moving to another city and starting life from scratch. After dinner, Tommy went to his room to do his homework, while Arthur and Jenna stayed in the kitchen to clear the table. "You seem pensive today," Jenna remarked as she wiped the plates. "Just a little tired. It's a difficult project. Why don't you take a couple of days off? We could go somewhere together." Arthur hugged his wife, breathing in the scent of her hair. "That's a good idea. Let's talk about it over the weekend." He didn't tell her about his fears. Maybe Lorraine wouldn't even try to find him. Maybe she would leave Chicago and start a new life in another city. Maybe his worries were unfounded. But somewhere deep down, Arthur knew that sooner or later, the past would catch up with him. Lorraine sat in the crowded waiting room of the city clinic, clutching her ticket number. She had been waiting for her turn to see the doctor for 2 hours. For the past few weeks, she had been plagued by constant fatigue, a slight fever, and swollen lymph nodes in her neck. At first, she blamed it on stress and hard physical work, but the symptoms persisted. In prison, medical care was perfunctory. Sick or not, the main thing was not to die. Now, on the outside, every visit to the doctor required time, money, and nerves. The free city clinic was the only option for people like her. Lorraine Parker, her number was finally called. Dr. Ramirez was a middle-aged woman with tired but kind eyes. She listened carefully to Lorraine's complaints, examined her, and frowned as she looked at her enlarged lymph nodes. "I need to send you for some tests," the doctor said as she filled out the referral form. "Get your blood drawn today, and the results will be ready in 3 days." "What do you suspect?" Lorraine asked, although she could tell from the doctor's expression that it was nothing good. "Let's not speculate. Get the tests done, and then we'll talk." The 3 days of waiting were torture. Lorraine worked on autopilot, mopping floors in office buildings, but her mind was far away. She tried to remember when she could have been infected. She had gotten a tattoo with a homemade needle in prison. Maybe that was when. Or maybe even earlier, back when she was dealing drugs and had to interact with all kinds of people. The test results came back positive. HIV infection. Dr. Ramirez said something about modern medications, about how it was no longer a death sentence, that it was possible to live a full life with the right treatment. But Lorraine only heard a buzzing in her ears. 42 years old, a criminal record, HIV. What kind of life? Who would hire her for a normal job? Who would want a relationship with her? "You need to tell all your sexual partners from the last few years," said the doctor. "They need to get tested." Lorraine smiled bitterly. She hadn't had any partners for many years. The last one was Arthur, but that was 10 years ago, long before her arrest. If she had been infected in prison or while dealing drugs, he was not at risk. But the thought of Arthur stayed with her all the way home. The only person who had ever truly loved her. The person she had lost because of her own stupidity. Now, having learned of her diagnosis, she felt acutely how lonely she was. She had no one to even tell about her grief. In her small room, Lorraine sat down at the old laptop she had bought at a pawn shop. The internet connection was poor, but she stubbornly searched for information about Arthur. Social networks, directories, any traces of his current life. The search turned out to be more difficult than expected. Arthur seemed to have vanished into thin air. He was not on Facebook or Instagram. His old phone number was no longer in service. His former workplace said he had quit several years ago and left no contact information. Week after week, Lorraine continued her search. She visited their old neighborhoods, asked acquaintances, and called construction companies. Gradually, she managed to find a lead. It turned out that Arthur was working as a manager at Chicago Construction Group. Lorraine visited the company's office several times and watched from a distance, but she didn't see Arthur. Finally, she plucked up the courage to call. "Arthur Parker? He's at the site," said the secretary. "I can take a message. Tell him Lorraine called. It's personal." "Your last name?" Lorraine hesitated. "Just Lorraine. He'll understand." Arthur didn't call back. The next day, she called again. "Arthur Parker says he doesn't know any Lorraine," the secretary replied coldly. It was a blow to her pride, but it didn't stop her. If he didn't want to talk on the phone, then she would have to meet him in person. Lorraine began to wait for him outside his office, then found out the address of the main facility where he worked. It was an unfinished building on the north side of town. Lorraine would go there after work, wait, and watch. The workers finished at 6 in the evening, and the management staff finished later. And then one day, she saw him. Arthur was coming out of a temporary office trailer, talking on the phone, heading for the parking lot. He hadn't changed much, except for gray hair at his temples and a few wrinkles around his eyes. He was still the same tall, broad-shouldered man who had once been her husband. Lorraine wanted to go up to him, but her legs wouldn't obey her. She stood around the corner of the neighboring building and watched him get into his new car and drive away. That night, she cried until morning. The psychological pressure grew with each passing day. The diagnosis, loneliness, failed attempts to contact the only person close to her from the past, it all piled up like a snowball. Lorraine hardly slept, forced herself to eat, and made mistakes at work. The head of the cleaning company had already reprimanded her twice. A few more mistakes like that, and she would lose her only source of income. But she couldn't concentrate on her work. Her thoughts kept returning to Arthur, to their past, to how things could have turned out differently. Through social media, she found their mutual old friends. She cautiously asked about Arthur. Gradually, the picture came together. He had remarried 3 years ago. His wife's name was Jenna, and she worked in social services. They had a house in a nice neighborhood and were happy. This information was the last straw. While Lorraine was rotting in prison, losing her health and her future, Arthur had built a new life. He had a house, a loving wife, stability, everything they once had. And she had lost it all through her own stupidity. A feeling of injustice gnawed at her from within. She understood that she was to blame for what had happened, but that didn't make the pain any less. Why are some people lucky, while others pay for their mistakes their whole lives? Why does Arthur have the right to happiness, but she doesn't? Lorraine began planning a meeting with her ex-husband. Since he avoids phone calls, she would have to approach him in person. But not at work. There were too many people there, and he might just walk away. Home was also difficult. She didn't know his exact address, and his wife might interrupt their conversation. She needed a place where they could be alone, where he couldn't run away without listening to her. A place where she could explain to him what was going on in her life, tell him about her diagnosis, and ask for help. Not financial help, but moral support. Just to talk to the man who once loved her. Lorraine bought a cheap surveillance camera at an electronics store, a small device that recorded to a memory card. She installed it in the bushes opposite the construction site where Arthur worked. Every evening, she took the memory card and studied the recordings at home. Gradually, she learned his routine. Arthur usually stayed at work longer than the others, leaving around 7 in the evening. On Fridays, he might stay until 8, apparently finishing his weekly reports. He always parked in the same spot, under a streetlight. It was perfect. On Friday evenings, almost no one stays at the construction site. She would approach him in the parking lot as he got into his car. He wouldn't be able to just drive away without listening to her, and if the conversation dragged on, no one would disturb them. Lorraine began rehearsing what she would say. She would start by apologizing for the past, then tell him about her diagnosis and how hard her life was. She would ask him to just talk to her, not to leave her alone with her pain. Arthur was a kind man. He would understand. On the last evening before the planned meeting, Lorraine stood in front of the mirror in her small room for a long time. A thin face, dull eyes, cheap clothes. She looked like what she had become, a former prisoner with no future. But tomorrow, Arthur would see her differently. Tomorrow she would tell him the truth, and perhaps find at least some understanding in her ex-husband. Friday, October 23rd, began as a normal day at the Parkers' house. Jenna left for work early in the morning. She had an important meeting with potential adoptive parents. Arthur was going to stay late at the facility to finish his weekly reports. Tommy planned to stay overnight at his friend Jason's house after school. He had new games that the boys wanted to play over the weekend. "See you Saturday morning," Tommy said, kissing Jenna on the cheek and waving to Arthur. "Don't forget to take breaks. Don't play all night," Jenna reminded him. "Sure thing, Mom." Arthur finished his coffee while reviewing the morning project reports. The renovation of the old warehouse into an office center was on schedule, but required constant monitoring. "Late day today?" Jenna asked as she packed her bag. "Yeah, until about 8. I need to prepare a report for Monday." Then I'll be late too. I'm finalizing the adoption papers for those brothers. I want to get everything done before the weekend. They kissed at the door, each heading for their car. It was a normal morning for normal people who had no idea that this day would be the last of their lives. At 6:30 in the evening, Jenna was the first to return home. She was happy. The adoption papers for the brothers were ready, and on Monday the boys would finally have a new family. After changing into her home clothes, she started making dinner. Arthur promised to be home by 8, and she wanted to greet him with a hot meal. Jenna turned on the music, chopped vegetables for a salad, and put the meat on to simmer. The house smelled of home comfort. She thought about how she would tell her husband about today's success, how they would spend tomorrow with Tommy at the lake. At 7:30, the doorbell rang. Jenna was surprised. Arthur always called if he was coming home early, and besides, he had a key. Maybe it was a neighbor or a delivery. She went to the door without looking through the peephole. "Who is it?" "Excuse me, I'm looking for Arthur Parker. Is this his house?" The voice belonged to a middle-aged woman. Jenna opened the door on the chain. "Who are you?" "Lorraine. I need to talk to Arthur about something important." Jenna didn't know anyone named Lorraine, but there was a strange tension in the woman's voice. Something told her not to open the door to a stranger. "Arthur isn't home. You can leave your phone number and I'll give it to him." "When will he be back?" "Late. It's better to call tomorrow." Jenna wanted to close the door, but the woman didn't move. "Please, I really need to talk to him. It's about his past." The word past made Jenna even more wary. Arthur had never talked in detail about his first marriage, and she hadn't pressed him. But now she realized that this woman might be connected to that part of his life. "I'm sorry, but I can't." Jenna didn't have time to finish. An hour and a half later, at 9 in the evening, Arthur returned home. He was surprised to see the lights on in the house, but Jenna's car was not in the driveway. Maybe she had gone to the store or to her parents' house. Arthur unlocked the door and immediately sensed that something was wrong. There was a strange smell in the air, metallic, heavy. Music was still playing in the kitchen, but Jenna herself was nowhere to be seen. "Jenna?" he called as he walked into the living room. Silence. Arthur headed to the kitchen, where something was quietly bubbling in a pot on the stove. Chopped vegetables lay on the cutting board, and an open bottle of wine stood nearby. It looked as if Jenna had stopped cooking halfway through. "Jenna, are you home?" He went upstairs and checked the bedroom, bathroom, and study. No one was there. But his wife's car was in the garage. He had checked. So she was either at home or had left on foot, which was completely out of character for her. Going downstairs, Arthur noticed a few drops of dark liquid on the floor by the front door. Leaning closer, he realized it was blood. His heart began to race. Arthur took out his phone and dialed Jenna's number. Somewhere in the house, her cell phone rang. The sound came from the living room, from behind the sofa. Going around the sofa, Arthur saw something that changed his life forever. Jenna was lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Her eyes were open, but lifeless. There was a deep wound in her neck. Next to her lay a kitchen knife from their own set. Arthur fell to his knees and tried to feel her pulse, even though he knew it was too late. Jenna was dead. In a state of shock, he dialed 911. "Emergency services, how can I help you?" "My wife, she's dead. Killed." "Sir, give me your address." Arthur struggled to give the address and explained that he had found his wife's body at home. "Don't touch anything at the scene. A patrol car is on its way." Arthur sat on the floor next to his wife's body, keeping away from the blood, unable to believe what was happening. Just that morning, they had breakfast together and made plans for the weekend. And now, the first patrol car arrived 12 minutes later. The officers quickly assessed the situation, cordoned off the house with yellow tape, and called in the investigation team and forensic experts. Detective Sarah Rodriguez arrived at the crime scene at 9:30. An experienced investigator with 12 years of experience, she had worked on enough murders to immediately assess the seriousness of the situation. After examining the body, the detective noted several important details. The wound on the neck was deep and precise. The killer knew what he was doing, or he was lucky to hit the carotid artery. There were virtually no signs of a struggle, which suggested that the attack had been sudden. The kitchen knife belonged to the victims themselves. The murder weapon had been taken from the scene. "Where were you between 6 and 9 o'clock tonight?" the detective asked Arthur, who was sitting on the porch of the house under the supervision of an officer. "At work, at a construction site on North Halstead. There are cameras there. There are witnesses." Rodriguez nodded. The alibi would need to be checked, but the man was clearly in shock. Either he really had nothing to do with the murder, or he was a very good actor. "Who else lives in the house?" "Tommy, my wife's son. He's 16, but he's staying at a friend's house tonight. I'll need his contact information." "Did Mrs. Parker have any enemies? Problems at work? Threats?" Arthur shook his head. "She's a social worker. She helps families, orphaned children. Everyone loves her." "What about you?" Arthur thought for a moment. In recent weeks, he had been plagued by a feeling of anxiety about Lorraine's possible release, but he hadn't told anyone about it, not even Jenna. "I don't know. Maybe." "Explain." "My first wife was recently released from prison. She tried to contact me, but I didn't answer her calls." Detective Rodriguez became alert. "What's her name?" "Lorraine Parker. Or rather, just Lorraine now. We're divorced." "What was she in for?" "Drug dealing. 8 years." "When was she released?" "A few months ago, I'm not sure exactly." Rodriguez wrote down every word. An ex-wife who was a criminal and was trying to re-establish contact was a serious possibility. "Did she threaten you or your current wife?" "Not directly, but the calls were persistent." The forensic team worked in the house until late at night. They found several important pieces of evidence: fingerprints on the front door that didn't belong to Arthur, Jenna, or Tommy. Hair on the victim's clothes, dark, long, clearly female. And most importantly, shoe prints in the hallway, size 39, women's. Neighbors said they saw an unfamiliar woman at the Parkers' house around 7:30 p.m. She was of average height, dark-haired, wearing a cheap jacket. She stood at the door for a long time, talking to someone, then entered the house. "I thought she was a relative or colleague of Jenna's," said neighbor Mr. Wilson. "She often had people over for work." By morning, Detective Rodriguez had pieced together a preliminary picture of the crime. The unknown woman arrived at the house around 7:30 p.m., somehow convinced Jenna to let her in, and then stabbed her to death. The motive was still unclear, but the ex-wife theory seemed the most likely. On Saturday morning, the detective went to the civil registry office to find information about Lorraine Parker. Then she went to the prison administration to find out the exact date of her release and her current address. Meanwhile, Tommy Collins was still at his friend's house, unaware of the tragedy. Arthur asked the detectives to give him time to tell the boy about his mother's death himself. This was perhaps the most difficult part of the whole situation. Experts were working at the Parkers' house, gathering every bit of evidence. The murder had been committed with particular cruelty, a single precise blow to the carotid artery. This indicated either the killer's medical knowledge or a lucky coincidence. Detective Rodriguez was looking through photos from the crime scene, compiling a profile of the perpetrator, a woman who knew the victim or her husband, convincing enough to get the cautious Jenna to open the door. Perhaps she introduced herself as a colleague or acquaintance. The first day of the investigation provided a clear direction for the search. Now they needed to find Lorraine Parker and find out where she was on Friday night. Saturday morning brought Detective Rodriguez his first serious leads. The prison administration confirmed that Lorraine Parker had been released on July 27th of this year. Her current address was listed as a room in the house at 142 South Ashland Avenue. By noon, the task force had gone to the address. The house turned out to be an old, two-story building divided into several small rooms for rent. The landlady, an elderly woman named Mrs. Jenkins, confirmed that Lorraine was renting a room in the basement. "She's a quiet girl, doesn't bother anyone," said the landlady. "She works as a cleaner and pays on time." "What's happened?" "We need to talk to her. Is she home?" "I don't know. I saw her leave last night. She hasn't been back since." Rodriguez got permission to look around the room. The tiny space with a single window near the ceiling was more like a closet. There was a narrow bed, an old chair, and a chipboard dresser. A laptop sat on the table. Looking through the browser history, the detective found numerous search queries about Arthur Parker. Lorraine had systematically searched for information about her ex-husband, his place of work, home address, details about his new wife. The bookmarks contained pages from the construction company where Arthur worked and the Social Services Department website with a photo of Jenna. In the chest of drawers was a surveillance camera with a memory card. After reviewing the recordings, Rodriguez saw footage of the construction site where Arthur worked. The filming had been going on for several weeks. Lorraine was studying her ex-husband's daily routine. She was stalking him, the detective concluded. By Saturday evening, a search warrant had been issued for Lorraine Parker. Her photo from her prison file was sent to all patrol crews. All that remained was to wait. Lorraine was found on Sunday morning, 20 miles from Chicago, at a bus stop in the town of Aurora. The local sheriff recognized her from the description and called for backup from the city police. "Lorraine Parker, you are under arrest on suspicion of murder," Detective Rodriguez said as he handcuffed her. Lorraine did not resist. She sat on the bus stop bench with a blank stare, as if she had been waiting for this moment. At the police station, Lorraine initially refused to talk, demanding a lawyer. But after a few hours, after being shown the evidence, her fingerprints from the crime scene and the surveillance camera footage, she broke down. "I didn't mean to kill her," Lorraine said quietly, sitting in the interrogation room. "I came to talk to Arthur, just to talk." Detective Rodriguez listened intently, recording every word on a tape recorder. "Tell me what happened on Friday night." Lorraine took a deep breath. "I waited for him for several hours near the house. Then I saw the lights on and realized someone was home. I decided to go up and ask when he would be back." "And what happened next?" "A woman opened the door, young, beautiful. I realized she was his new wife. I asked her to tell Arthur I had come." "But you didn't leave." Lorraine shook her head. "She was about to close the door, and I couldn't just leave. I told her who I was, that I was married to Arthur, that I needed to talk to him about something important." "Did Jenna let you in?" "No. She said she couldn't without her husband's permission. But I didn't leave the door. I kept explaining how important it was for me to talk to Arthur. I told her I'd been in prison, that I was sick now." The detective noticed the change in Lorraine's expression, from indifference to anger. "And what did she say?" "She looked at me with disgust, like I was filth. She said Arthur had started a new life and didn't want to know anything about the past, that people like me had no place near honest families." "Is that true?" "Not verbatim, but I could see from her face that that's what she was thinking. A rich, successful, healthy woman looking at a former prisoner with HIV. She thought she was better than me." Lorraine fell silent, wiping away her tears. "What happened next?" "I asked permission to come in and wait for Arthur at home. I explained that it was cold outside and that I had nowhere else to go, but she refused again. She said she would call the police if I didn't leave." "And then you used force?" Lorraine nodded. "I pushed the door as she was trying to close it. She got scared and ran deeper into the house, and I followed her." "Why did you take the knife?" "I didn't take it. It was lying on the kitchen table. She was standing next to the stove cooking something. She turned to me and yelled for me to get out of her house." Detective Rodriguez could see that Lorraine was reliving that moment. "And what did you feel?" "Rage. My whole life is ruined, and she has everything. A house, a husband who used to be mine, health, a job, and she wouldn't even listen to me. She looked at me like I was trash. Did you grab the knife? Yes. At first, I just held it in my hand so she would stop yelling. I wanted her to listen to me. I told her that Arthur had been my husband for 5 years, that we were happy until I made a mistake. Did Jenna try to defend herself? No, she just stood there and looked at the knife. And then she said, "You're crazy. Arthur was right to leave you." Lorraine's voice grew quieter. And that was the last straw? I don't remember how it happened. One moment I was holding the knife and the next, she was lying on the floor. Lorraine's confession was complete and detailed. A court-appointed psychiatric evaluation found her sane at the time of the crime, but noted serious psychological problems. Dr. Marcus Wayne, a forensic psychiatrist with 20 years of experience, compiled a detailed profile of the defendant. Lorraine Parker exhibits classic signs of antisocial personality disorder, exacerbated by prolonged incarceration and a recent HIV diagnosis, the expert concluded. Inability to empathize, tendency to manipulate, viewing herself as a victim of circumstances while denying her own responsibility. The psychiatrist noted that 8 years in prison did not reform Lorraine, but only intensified her resentment toward society. The patient believes that the world owes her something and is unable to accept the consequences of her own actions. The HIV diagnosis became a trigger that intensified her sense of injustice and her desire to find someone to blame for her misfortunes. The expert also pointed out Lorraine's lack of sincere remorse for her actions. During the conversation, she repeatedly emphasized that she did not plan the murder, that she just wanted to talk. But at the same time, she admitted that she deliberately followed the victim's family, studied their daily routine, and planned the meeting. There is a clear dissociation between her actions and her awareness of them. Lorraine Parker's trial began 6 months after the murder. The trial lasted 2 weeks. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney David Clark, presented compelling evidence of premeditated murder. The defendant systematically stalked the Parker family, the prosecutor said in his closing argument. She studied their lifestyle, set up surveillance, and chose the moment to attack. This was not a spontaneous crime of passion, but the cold-blooded murder of an innocent woman. The defense, led by attorney Betsy Martin, sought a lenient sentence, citing the difficult circumstances of the defendant's life. Lorraine Parker is a victim of a system that threw her to the curb, the attorney argued. 8 years in prison for drugs, an HIV diagnosis, the inability to find a normal job, social rejection, all this drove her to despair. Arthur Parker testified as a witness for the prosecution. He talked about Lorraine's attempts to contact him, his fears, and how he found his wife's body. Jenna was a good person, he said, struggling to hold back tears. She helped orphaned children and created families. She didn't deserve to die like that. Tommy Collins also spoke in court. The 16-year-old struggled to find the words to describe his mother. She was the best mom in the world. She always supported me and believed in me. Now I'm all alone. Arthur took custody of Tommy after Jenna's death, but their relationship became difficult. The boy blamed his stepfather for hiding the truth about his past, that his ex-wife had killed his mother. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. The verdict was unanimous: guilty of first-degree murder. Judge Robert Campbell said in his sentencing statement, "The defendant committed a particularly cruel crime against an innocent woman. Lorraine Parker deliberately tracked down her victim, broke into her home, and killed her in cold blood. The fact that the killer herself had experienced hardship does not justify her actions." The sentence was life imprisonment, without the possibility of parole. Lorraine listened to the sentence without emotion. When the judge asked if she had any last words, she stood up and said quietly, "I didn't want it to turn out this way. I just wanted to talk to the man who once loved me." After the sentence was handed down, Arthur left the courthouse without looking back. Tommy walked beside him, looking several years older than his age. "Is it over now?" the boy asked. "Yes," Arthur replied. "Now we can move on with our lives." But they both knew that the scars from this tragedy would remain forever. Jenny was gone, and Lorraine would spend the rest of her life behind bars, never realizing that she had destroyed not only other people's lives, but her own as well. Detective Sarah Rodriguez closed the case, noting in her report, "The murder has been solved, and the guilty party has received her deserved punishment. The motive was revenge and jealousy of her ex-husband's more successful life.